We acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, the gathering grounds of many diverse First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, whose footsteps have marked this land and whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Hello, and welcome back to Research Recasted, the Knowledge Mobilization podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Howlett, and today we are joined by Dr. Leanne Hedberg. Dr. Leanne Hedberg is a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Inclusive Entrepreneurship and completed her doctoral studies at the University of Alberta in Strategic Management and Organizations. Dr. Hedberg's research takes a community-based approach and aims to make a community impact by convening cross-sector collaborations aimed towards the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals. Hi, Leanne. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited for this opportunity.
And we're super excited to have you here. So I want to start off because you are a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Inclusive Entrepreneurship. And I was wondering if we could start by you telling us a little bit about what that is and what that means.
Yeah, I'd love to. First of all, Canada Research Chairs are new to MacEwan, and we currently have 4 Canada Research Chairs. And so that's phenomenal in itself because a Canada Research Chair is a federally funded research position. So each Canada Research Chair has a different topic, and each topic is clearly important to Canada as a nation in order to have been funded and awarded. So as you said, my Canada Research Chair is in Inclusive Entrepreneurship. The actual formal title is a Canada Research Chair in Social Entrepreneurship for Marginalized and Disadvantaged Community Members with an emphasis on economic reconciliation. The economic reconciliation part isn't like a part of the formal title, but that's the part of the Canada Research Chair. And so when I started 2.5 years ago, I just started calling all of that inclusive entrepreneurship. And at the time, inclusive entrepreneurship wasn't even a term that people were using. So I kind of thought I made it up. And now, but I think it's one of those sort of situations where something comes into the societal consciousness at the same time, because now the term inclusive entrepreneurship is increasingly being used. So that just tells you a little bit about kind of Canada Research Chairs and MacEwan, and a little bit about my research chair.
Oh, and so how you mentioned MacEwan and how we have these 4 phenomenal researchers who also hold the position. I want to know how has not only the appointment, but MacEwan as an institution itself impacted your research?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's something I really enjoy talking about. I got my PhD from U of A in the Department of Strategic Management and Organizations. Okay. And it's a very traditional Tier 1 research institution where the focus is on contributing theory, developing theory. But theory is important. It's important to abstract what we're observing or learning, and then to generalize that. And so that's what theory does. But I was also interested in making an impact. And there seems to be this sort of divide. Either you can contribute theory, which is like traditional, conventional academic research, or you can do research that makes an impact. And there's been this debate, I'd say, increasingly loud debate on the role of research and the need for research to also make an impact. So most academic researchers their performance is based on getting publications in academic journals. And so, but the research that needs to be conducted to make an impact often isn't really translatable to theoretical contributions that are published in academic journals. So there's sometimes researchers can feel torn. Here's what I need to do to get tenure. Here's really what I want to do. I want my research to make an impact. And what's great about MacEwan is that MacEwan is newly developing its identity as a research institution. It wasn't that long ago that MacEwan was a 2-year college. Mm-hmm. And so as MacEwan is finding its identity, our identity as a research institution, what comes to bear on that identity is MacEwan's location in downtown Edmonton. We're in the core of Edmonton. So I like to talk about MacEwan as the community's university or the people's university. And one element of that stands out about MacEwan and makes MacEwan really unique and especially attractive to me and the type of research I want to do is that MacEwan focuses on community-based research. Sometimes the acronym is CBR. It's also called community-based scholarship, community-engaged scholarship, sometimes just engaged scholarship. All of that refers to doing research with and for the community. So addressing some environmental or social issues, partnering with the community to do that. That may be government, that may be nonprofits, that may be for-profits, and co-designing what's the issue here? What do we need data for? Co-designing how that data is gathered, how that data is analyzed, and how that data is used. And that's a lot different than like normal academic research in which the researcher is like, I got to get published. So where's a gap in the theory? How could I contribute to theory? And it's not always like that. Sometimes researchers see a real sort of question or mystery or tension in the real world. And they're like, oh, this hasn't been addressed by research and theory. So I'm going to investigate this. But the researcher's doing that alone, setting their research questions, designing the research, getting the data, analyzing the data, and then writing that up and publishing it wherever they want. Well, wherever they can get published. And so, as you might imagine, doing community-based research is a lot more complex and takes a lot more time. Also, those relationships have to be developed and trust has to be established. And in my opinion, in my experience, the research can also really tends to have more on-the-ground impact. So MacEwan really focuses on, not exclusively on community-based research, but I think a big part of MacEwan's research identity is making a difference in the community, for which community-based research is perfect for. Mm-hmm. So I'm really grateful to be here from that regard. All the relationships MacEwan has, the reputation that MacEwan has in the community, the other faculty here who are focused on community-based research. So it's a very collegial environment. And so that's why I forget the question, but it was something like, what makes MacEwan a great place to be?
How has MacEwan impacted your research and how does it work to shape your research?
Yeah, another aspect is that MacEwan is an undergrad-only university. So typically a researcher will have grad students and postdoc students, so individuals who have completed their PhD, but are kind of doing this interim position before they get their academic position. A postdoc is a time where they can focus on their research and get more publications out and then be better positioned to apply for academic positions. But because MacEwan doesn't have graduate programs, we don't have graduate students who are maybe in research-oriented masters. Mm-hmm. We don't have PhD students who also support research. Like I would have PhD students under me who would come to me because they would be in their interest in research aligned with mine. MacEwan has another rich and rare resource, which is undergraduate researchers. So what's really one of the many things that's so special about MacEwan is that undergraduates have so many opportunities to engage in research. And that's not typical of other universities. So, and there are a lot of students here who are really value this opportunity. So that means I get to work with undergraduate students who are really engaged, really eager. And then I get the value of this sense of fulfillment of really providing undergraduates with experiences that shape them and give them opportunities and differentiate their resumes when they go on the job market, or really help them get into grad school because they now have this research experience.
No, that's so wonderful. Like, I also have a degree from the University of Alberta,
which is a great school.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that there's anything bad about it, but I can definitely understand the difference between the two institutions. Like, I just have my undergrad from the U of A, and I'm working at another undergrad here at MacEwan. But you're right, like, it is very much more academic theory focused, whereas I find MacEwan is more on the practical doing side of things. And I think you're right, both of them have merit, but there is something unique and special about being able to do like on the ground work in order to help. And the community aspect of it makes it great, because I do know that a lot of academic journals, like having to be published in academic journals, there's a level of access that is needed. And sometimes as an undergrad, you don't necessarily have that. And it's hard to break into that unless you're at a higher level. Whereas MacEwan, all of these opportunities are available to you. Which is amazing. I mean, you talked about working with students and having students be a part of your research. How have they shaped it?
I can't say that students have shaped my research.
Okay. Well, how have they made an impact on what you're doing?
Well, my CRC is new. So I'm just getting going. So I'm just in the process of hiring research assistants, and so we're still working that out. But what students get the ability to do here as research assistants is to conduct literature reviews, sometimes help conduct focus groups or interviews, analyze data, get published, become a co-author on a publication, help create case studies, business case studies. They can also be teaching case studies. So I really consider that when I'm designing my research, like, what can I have research assistants do? What rich experiences can I give them? And also, how can those experiences support the research that I'm doing for my CRC?
Okay. So speaking of creating your research, can you go into a little bit more about your current research for your CRC, which is I'm going to use the term inclusive entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So what drew me to this position, to apply for this position, was the focus of the Canada Research Chair. I grew up in a very rural area, and we didn't have much money growing up. And so I understand entrepreneurship as a way out of poverty.
Okay.
And I want to tell just a brief experience of actually when I did my job interview, the day I did my job interview at MacEwan, and how it shaped me and how I am in relationship to my work. Because as much as we like to think that researchers are objective and neutral, that it isn't. That's almost never true. Researchers bring their personal histories, their biases into their research.
No, but I think it's one of those
more recently, there's a call for that.
Time.
There are scholars and others saying we need for researchers who are really bettering society. And so they need to be open and honest about that, about their agenda to make a positive impact. So when I was at my job interview, it was a day-long interview, and it was honestly super grueling. I started with 7:30 breakfast downtown with the AVP of research, and then a tour of the school, meeting with some community partners who were also interviewing me, doing a pretty big presentation about my research, and a semi-teaching presentation, having lunch with the faculty. It was a long day. And then at the end of that day was the panel interview. So I had already been on for many hours. They did give me breaks and food. It wasn't cruel, but that's just kind of how job talks are. They're just intense and long. At the end of that day was the interview panel, and I was exhausted by the end of that, and so exhausted that I was asked a friend to come and pick me up. And when my friend picked me up and asked how the day was, I said, "Bye." It was tough. And I said, I have this feeling that I'm knocking on a door to a building that I don't belong in. And there are windows to this building, and I can see in, and I can see people who belong. And it doesn't seem like they're any smarter than me. And so I'm not sure why I don't belong, but it's just like clear, this strong feeling that I don't belong for some reason. And I don't know if that's because I did grow up with a family that didn't have an education. I grew up very rurally, grew up pretty poor. And so I felt just different, like I'm just not the same as those people in there. And as painful as that felt, and largely because I couldn't really identify where those feelings were coming from, I had this clear thought that I never want to lose that feeling, because there are so many people in Canada, in North America, immigrants, minorities, Indigenous, who experience, or people with special abilities, mental challenges, who experience on a daily basis not belonging. And I thought I want my work to be based on that. I want to keep that personal experience, as painful as it is, because that's what drives my work. And so let's talk about my research, which is in inclusive entrepreneurship. Yeah. So I did a bunch of stakeholder engagement with community partners who had been involved. So I'm a director of the Social Innovation Institute, and the Canada Research Chair is connected with the Social Innovation Institute. And so one of the first things I needed to do when I was hired was create a new strategy for the Social Innovation Institute. And the Social Innovation Institute was really community facing, had a lot of community partners that had been involved. So I started reaching out to them and doing stakeholder engagement on, given what you know of the Social Innovation Institute, and that it's meant to engage faculty and students with community partners. And given this topic of the CRC, how do you think the Social Innovation Institute can best serve our community? And so what I learned was that there are all these nonprofits in Edmonton that are serving minorities, trying to support minorities in becoming entrepreneurs as a way to participate in the economy. And I heard many stories of immigrants who come to Canada and aren't able to work in the profession that they used to be able to work in, aren't able to get capital to start a business because of the paperwork, or, what banks need that they just don't have. It doesn't translate well. Maybe their degrees didn't transfer very well. And entrepreneurship is really the only way that they can put food on their family tables and hopefully send their kids to college one day. And yet our entrepreneurial ecosystems, and not Edmonton's not at fault here. This is around the world, entrepreneurial ecosystems developed around a Silicon Valley idea of entrepreneurship. When someone says the word entrepreneurship now, most often what comes to mind isn't the fullness of entrepreneurship. Like we think about tech and innovation. We think about a focus on profit and scaling and growth. And all those things are good and needed and need support, but they don't resonate with a lot of minority or equity deserving entrepreneurs. So my hope is that Edmonton can be a lighthouse for the rest of the world in how to transform entrepreneurial ecosystems to be more inclusive. The OECD calls these minority entrepreneurs missing entrepreneurs. And the OECD states that there is huge economic and social benefit for supporting these entrepreneurs. The research to date says that these missing entrepreneurs face challenges in starting businesses because their social networks, like they just don't have accesses to the supports and resources that are available. But also, when they do learn about those supports and resources, many of them don't feel accessible. They're not culturally resonant. They don't reflect a version of entrepreneurship that meets their idea of entrepreneurship, which is based on small and medium enterprises rather than these big, what's called unicorns or gazelles. So what I've done for my research is I've convened a cross-sector collaboration in Edmonton. This is community-based research. So I've got a number of these nonprofits. I've also got government at different levels and financial institutions coming together as a cross-sector collaboration to collectively raise this awareness around this issue. And the hope is to impact systems change by helping to inform policy, for instance, and creating resources and supports that are resonant, that are culturally reflective, and that also, I think, really importantly, take a trauma-informed approach to supporting entrepreneurship. Because what I've learned in my research so far is that we can't just take this business model 101, which is kind of a template for creating a business, and say, now you're ready. Many equity deserving individuals have experienced trauma. Consider generational trauma for Indigenous peoples, or in many instances, it's been a trauma just to immigrate to Canada. Canada's a wonderful place, but there's language barriers and just difficulty navigating the systems. And so I think taking a trauma-informed approach and a community-based approach to entrepreneurship is really important. So that's what it's called the Inclusive Entrepreneurship Roundtables. That's what we're focused on. So it's really a community answer, developing a community solution to a problem, and then from that, creating a framework that can be used around the world. So those are the hopes for my CRC research here at MacEwan.
Wow. That honestly is an incredible goal to work towards. And I'm very excited to see how that plays out. I want to touch, because we're talking about the topic of entrepreneurship. And you've mentioned previously that there's a narrowness to how that's defined.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about how it's narrow, and maybe give your definition of entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I'd love that. So in my work, I'm aiming to create awareness around how our definition of entrepreneurship is narrow, and that it focuses on tech and innovation and these gazelles or unicorns. They're called innovation-driven enterprises, IDEs. And it's most of the resources that support entrepreneurship are focused on supporting that. And while that's good and is good for the economy, what we've learned is that hasn't been the savior for economic development that was hoped for. The truth is that 99.2% of businesses in Canada are small and medium-sized enterprises. They're the backbone of our economy. They employ the vast majority of Canada's labor force. And so I'd like to play a role in bringing awareness to that and expanding, rightly expanding or broadening a definition of entrepreneurship to not just support or be focused on those tech or innovation-driven gazelles. And innovation's important, tech is important, but to support a lot more entrepreneurship. So that may look like a daycare or a restaurant or some service businesses. These may not be the businesses that grow to employ 10,000 people, but by employing 10 to 12 other people in a neighborhood or a community, and giving them jobs, changes the trajectory for multiple families and changes the future for multiple families. So does that kind of answer your question about the definition of entrepreneurship and how I'm hoping to be a part in shifting that?
No, that was great. I honestly had no idea that so much of our economy was built by these small and medium-sized businesses. That's something that I never would have thought of, because you see the world and you're like, oh, it's just these big corporations.
Google, Amazon,
everything. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That kind
of course,
everything.
Yep.
And you kind of miss the little family-run restaurant down the street.
Yes, and the important role that those play in a diverse, vibrant economy.
Yeah. No, I think the work you're doing and the research that you're doing is really wonderful. And I said it, I'll say it again. I'm really excited to see where this goes. I want to ask what's kind of coming up in the future for you and your research.
Yeah, so this type of work, cross-sector collaboration work, is notoriously challenging. People aren't getting paid to do this work. I'm working with multiple organizations, different organizations that in a way have their own language, their own policies, their own challenges, their own missions and visions. And so first of all, I'll say that the United Nations says that the only way there is any hope to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, is through cross-sector collaborations. Many of the problems society faces now are so complex that government can't tackle them alone. For-profits can't tackle them alone. Nonprofits can't tackle them alone. But it takes different sectors coming together. Each sector has their own lens, their own knowledge, their own tools and resources. And so those need to be combined to address complex issues like poverty and inequality and environmental degradation. And so I just made the case for how important cross-sector collaborations are, but they're difficult to bring, all these different entities together, and it takes time. And so the Inclusive Entrepreneurship Roundtables have been meeting for a year and a half, which is incredible in itself. And it speaks to Edmonton, and it speaks to the collaborative culture that we have. It speaks to the passion and the really good intentions by nonprofits and especially government, who are really invested and participating, engaging robustly in this Inclusive Entrepreneurship Roundtable. So there is something called political will, like this strong appetite and willingness and even energy around transforming Edmonton's entrepreneurial ecosystem to be more inclusive and creating a framework for other communities to do the same. So what's ahead is continuing to meet. Our next roundtable is going to be kind of a reflect and reset meeting. Like, okay, we've come this far. We've grown immensely. There are going to be quite a few new participants at the next roundtable as they've heard about this work and want to be part of it. So we're going to do a reset. So here's what we've done so far. What can we do together? What's possible together? And because I'm doing community-based research, I don't get to direct that. I get to have the privilege of facilitating that process and bringing everyone together. It's an enormous privilege. We need to figure that out collectively. And like I said, it's not as easy as taking a vote and majority rules. This is important work. It's big work. It has huge positive implications. And so that's what's next, is kind of designing the way forward. And then my research is based on, first of all, my research is based on this whole dynamics and processes of this cross-sector collaboration. And because the book hasn't been written on how to do that yet. And so there's lots of rich information to come out of there that I am eager to sort of codify, write up, and share or present. And then there's the research on finding out from the individuals being served. That's so important. Oftentimes, programs miss carefully identifying the problem by talking directly to those who are affected by the issue, and then finding out directly from those same individuals what resources and supports do they need. So I'm excited to be embarking on that data gathering and sharing. So that's what's in the future. So I've been talking about community-based research a lot, and there's something really exciting coming up for MacEwan, at MacEwan. Sorry, it's for everybody. It is the C2U Expo, and C2U stands for Community to University. And the C2U Expo is held every year, and it's put on by CBR Canada, and CBR Canada stands for Community-Based Research Canada. And the C2U Expo is being held for the first time in Alberta, and it's being hosted by MacEwan University on May 12th through the 15th. So this is an incredible opportunity for people, whether you're a for-profit, nonprofit, government, part of a university, a faculty member, or students, to come and learn about community-based research, learn more about community-based research, be inspired by seeing presentations of how community-based research has been done. We're going to have community partners here, lots of faculty, members of government, and I'm just encouraging everyone to look at Google C2U Expo 2025, and you'll be brought right to the website where you can learn more about the event. We're going to have a fabulous keynote speaker, and it's going to be engaging. This is not an academic conference. This is a social movement. So I'm encouraging everyone to take a look at that and hopefully attend and register.
Amazing. Yeah, no, we'll make sure that all the details are put in the description of this video.
Thanks.
Now, before we end for today, I have one more question for you. And I want to ask, what advice would you give to our listeners, whether it be students, faculty, staff, other researchers?
That's such a good question. Like advice in just general, on any topic.
On any topic, just what advice would you give to somebody?
Okay. My advice is that you can do work that matters. You can do work that makes an impact if you want, if that's something that's in your heart. I know sometimes students, I get this sense, like I teach in a business faculty, and I get the sense that these students are just like not fully there with their hearts. And I think because there's this idea, that we have ideas of business, just like we have these ideas of what entrepreneurship is. We have these ideas about business, but really business can be for good. So, for instance, in social enterprises, where the business model providing a service or a product is actually used as a way to make a difference for community members in some way or another. So I think that I'd like to give advice that, especially for business students, that there's opportunity to make impact, and a business education can be used towards that if that's what your passion is. I think for researchers, for faculty, my advice would be to, if you're not already engaged in community-based research, to come to the expo and learn about it, or learn about it in another way, because even though it can take more time and it can be more complicated, I think that it's so worthwhile and important to society. And I think that community-based research really highlights the important impact that research can make. For related to like inclusive entrepreneurship, I would encourage listeners to just consider how our definition of entrepreneurship has been narrow. And it's no one's fault. It's just kind of how things unfolded from this Silicon Valley. The Silicon Valley was a huge success. And of course, that like other communities wanted to replicate that. But it's not always relevant to other communities. So I guess I would just ask for listeners to maybe seek out diverse businesses, or businesses that are minority owned, and support those. So I think I could just end there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here and talking with us today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, that's all we have for today's episode of Research Recasted. If you want to support this podcast, you can visit Research Recasted on your favorite podcast platforms to find new episodes every 2 weeks. Also, don't forget to check us out on Instagram at Research Recasted, where you can leave us a like, give us a follow, or send us any follow-up questions you have from today's episode. This has been Research Recasted, a knowledge mobilization podcast brought to you by the Office of Research Services and the Faculty of Fine Arts and Communication at MacEwan University.